This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
I was going to check, but we're live.
We're live.
Oh my God, we're live.
We're
Holy
live.
crap. Who did that?
Oh my God, we're having a fire sale.
Boom.
What's that from?
It sounds familiar. It sounds like you're the announcer in Warzone right now.
That was just a sympathy laugh then.
Yeah, it was.
It's from Arrested Development.
I never watched it a lot. I liked what I saw. I just never got into it.
Okay, well.
It was the same thing as The Office. I watched one episode of Arrested Development on TV, but like had no context. And same with The Office. And I was like, this is the stupidest show ever. But if you watch it and you follow from the beginning, it makes a whole lot more sense and it's much easier to get into.
I've seen enough to like understand. And also their cast alone, like Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and I can't remember her name, Mallory Archer from Archer. You know, the mom.
I forgot her name too. Yeah.
Well, not just, but recently.
How much could a banana possibly cost? $10?
I saw a chart once that linked all the references in that show, and they're just so deep. I've probably watched it through like 4 or 5 times, and I still like catch something new every time. It's like the smartest humor. So
I love it.
So check it out again.
Do it.
I will. I've seen The Office probably 10 times through, not by choice, but I've seen Westworld 4 or 5 times through, so I'm down for a 4 or 5.
Did you see they're like taking down Westworld now?
Well, they canceled the next season, which, I mean, honestly.
Well, yeah.
But they took it off HBO. I know a lot of stuff is like shaking up at HBO right now.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Because it was like that last season just came out and then it's like not going to be on there anymore or something. I don't know. I'm getting confused now because I think we have a Showtime subscription, but you can subscribe to Showtime through like every freaking service.
Yeah.
So like, I'm like, oh, that thing was on Showtime that I was going to watch. And then it's like, log into Prime. No, we don't have Showtime on here. Is it on HBO Max? Is it on whatever? And I'm like, this is awful. Showtime should be like automatically available or tied to all of those accounts so I can use any of them. But no, it's billed on one of them and I can only use it there. It's insane.
When the new season of Dexter came out, I just went direct to Showtime.
Direct to the Pirate Bay.
Yes.
Well, don't tell everyone. I had to get YouTube TV recently to watch a show that I wanted to watch. And number one, YouTube TV is not cheap. And
no, it's not.
I'm like, okay, I'm just waiting for this show to end so I can cancel this subscription. Number two,
you forgot to cancel it.
I didn't forget the show's still going. YouTube, it's actually
the show
really
goes on
nice.
Forever, so you got to pay for it forever.
Yeah, honestly, they've got me hooked. So like, I'm willing to pay so that I don't have to like wake up every Monday morning and log into a unnamed site and download a less clear picture.
Yeah, it's like the people who would go into the movie theaters with the camera and then
my God,
the audio is awful unless the person sat in the handicap accessible seat and plugged in their headphone jack into that. The worst part about those people pirating stuff in the theater was like the audio made it unbearable. And then somebody figured that out and it's like, well, it still looks like crap, but you can like at least enjoy the audio. Did I know anything about this, by the way?
I never said the show. I'm going to say it because, or else people I'm watching Yellowstone and I am hooked in the veins, hooked.
My parents were watching that when I was visiting them last and I really was getting into it. And then I forgot all about it. So I'll have to watch that sometime.
It's the most popular TV show in America.
Really?
I have like a cowboy fantasy. I always have. So it's just up my alley. I watched like the first 4 seasons in like 3 days.
That's why you're such a cowboy coder.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot to unpack from that statement. First, where's the data that is the most popular TV show in America?
You just said it. That's the data.
Internet.
He's the source.
I read it on Reddit, so it's gospel. I think like they use Nielsen ratings or whatever to determine that in the United States. Still.
This is a good segue
Who is
into
Mr.
a conversation
Nielsen?
we had yesterday during an incident at work
Yes. We
So
were bamboozled.
in the United States, if a fellow American says Southerner, they're talking about the Southern United States. But does that context apply when we say Southerner and we're talking to people globally?
South Equator,
Right?
Or Southern in their
South-
country.
South Hemispherians.
Yep. But we conferred with someone in Brazil, and it sounds like their South is not too dissimilar from our South.
Exactly. In the context of Brazil.
Yes. So
So with-
far, it works out 100% for me. No
Andrew
one has
also-
told me differently yet.
Andrew also, in the middle of this incident, said, did you know that an adult human hand can fit inside an eagle's talon? And then proceeded to send us a picture of this, which looked photoshopped.
Because Jason didn't believe me. He just doubted me. And Jason's like, I don't believe you. That okay, you could argue that I shouldn't have brought it up in the first place, but here we are. Jason's like, there's no way I don't believe you. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go find it on Reddit. And I showed him, and he's like, oh, that's fake news.
Then we took it to Chat GPT-3 to get the
Yes.
source of truth. And it
Which we
said,
understood differently.
well, I don't know if it's that, but it started by saying it is unlikely that an adult human hand could fit inside an eagle's talon. And then Andrew, it proceeds to then explain why. And Andrew's takeaway was it's possible, but you shouldn't do it. But that's not what it said. It said it's unlikely that it would.
No, it was saying that it's unlikely a human would put their hand inside of an eagle's talon because the eagle would just bite it off with its razor sharp
It said
dinosaur teeth.
it was unlikely that it would fit.
I don't know if I saw the word fit.
That's literally the question I asked it.
You and the person in the mirror are gaslighting me a lot these days.
Oh my God. Oh, you
But-
are.
I
can't
showed
do
you
this.
though, the
I
eagle
can't do
though.
this anymore.
Eagles have huge talons. That's all I'm saying. Go look it up, people. Some of them are huge.
All right.
And
Yeah.
watching eagles fight is.
On that note,
Hold on. How many eagles have you seen fight?
I would love watching nature documentaries, dude. David Attenborough. I wish he was my grandfather.
Andrew, tell us something terrible you did with code this week.
No. I made a serverless function on Vercel with Ruby and it worked. And then I rewrote it in Sinatra just to see if it would work, and it worked. So then I put it back into Vercel and it still worked. And now I have the project 90% done, and my brain is not interested in the final 10%.
Okay, so where did you,
because you did
land
that
on this?
90% 3 times.
Yeah, exactly. See, you're starting to pick up on something, right? This is not the only place I've done this.
Give us one example of another time you've done something 3 times.
I have rewritten my website in the past 6
Whoa.
months at
I
least 5 times.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't ask for a 20 timer. I asked for 3
Oh,
timer.
okay. I rewrote my VS Code settings from scratch 3 times. No, actually, I've probably done that more than
From
3 times.
scratch?
Yeah, I like deleting them and just starting over. I really need help. This is cry
Chris-
for help.
Chris, tell us what you
Man.
did with code this week.
I don't know. That's a good question. I've been to the airport at 4:30 in the morning multiple times this week. So like this week's kind of a blur.
Or are you saying everything you did with code was...
Yeah, I mean, it could be. Yeah. I guess the borderline one here is having to actually physically print a PDF to debug and see if something was fixed. That's a first for me in however many years of programming. Renders perfectly on the computer, but somewhere in that, what you would expect, the PDF rendering in your computer, that somehow just gets rasterized and sent to the printer, you would think. But no. Yeah, apparently
Rasterize
that
is a
does
cool
not.
word.
Is a cool
Rasterize is a cool word. I know I've done a lot of PDF printing to printers to run, see if it looked right, and it didn't. And I've had to do that a lot. I used to work at a company that did a lot of printing, so I've done a lot of
Kinko's?
work with printers.
Yeah, FedEx Kinko's.
Yeah. I worked on that. Yeah. I was actually a UPS driver, but
Wait, why would you have to do printing as a UPS driver?
because that's how I got my routes for the day, because I don't use technology in my former life.
I am just glad to hear other people have printers, because I got roasted at work one day because I had a printer like I was
I have
some
one.
boomer.
I like always have to print something around tax season. It's like a guaranteed thing that I've got to do that at least once a year. So other than that, honestly, don't use it hardly ever, but scanning stuff in is an occasional thing as well. You get some tax paperwork, scan it in, whatever.
You were making it sound thrilling.
The only reason I use it is around taxes, which are not the most fun thing.
They are not. Did you get your rasterization issue solved?
Yes and no. I fixed it by just switching from the OTF font format to the TTF font format, which is like the most compatible one, I guess.
The true type.
Yeah, so I don't remember what the OTF stands for.
Open type?
It might be, actually.
Open type foundry.
I was trying to think of the opposite of true, the false type.
I searched for OTF meaning and it says only the family. So
only the fans.
Only the fans.
It's open.
Called it. It's open. Fix it yourself. That's what it means.
It's open source.
Yeah. So yeah, like I just switched the thing, but it doesn't really fix the issue. So I tweeted about it because fun things that you don't know about PDFs, they don't support UTF-8 by default or whatever. So you got to supply your own fonts. Then if you do that, you got to make sure you got the A font that supports all the characters you want and yada, yada, yada. And we're using Prawn for doing PDFs. So added a font to fix special characters. Then it fixes that until you print it on the printer. And then you find out that it's just garbage. So we've talked to Cameron Dutro before on a previous episode. I happened to be like looking through the ttfunk gem to see what font types were supported and stuff. And I saw his avatar and some commits and stuff. And that's like the prawn gem that handles fonts. So that had support for OTFs, thought it completely worked. It's a fairly more recent feature that was added. So apparently there's still a little bug there or so. I have a feeling he will get that fixed fairly soon. He was like, yeah, I added that feature. So I guess it wasn't fully finished or complete. But the easy thing is just find a different format of the font. Not the worst thing in the world, but I don't know a lot about fonts themselves, like the internals of all of that and how they work. I just download the font, double click it, install it on my desktop, and I'm done. So that's about it. Or the nonsense of like serving them up in CSS imports and all that crap.
Subsetting the fonts. That's what I do.
Yeah. Fun stuff. But the only way to actually test and see if your fix worked was to print stuff out. So I'd like print it and then go take that piece of paper, see if it printed right, then put it back in on the top of the stack and like rotate it so it would print on the front and the back and then the like bottom of the front and the bottom of the back just to not waste paper, just to debug. Yeah, that was an interesting situation that I haven't run into before.
Lots of tables.
Printers were a lot better back in the day where you had to tear the little nubs off the side.
Dot matrix.
Yeah. And they like had their own built-in soundtrack, basically.
My dad's computer system at work was using dot matrix printers until like 3 years ago. And when I was a kid, things were really slow in the automotive parts rebuilding industry. And my job as a kid was to like shred those dot matrix papers. And the shredder was probably from like the 70s. It's amazing I didn't like physically harm myself trying to shred that stuff. But I have fond memories of those green and white papers.
When I learned to code, it was on this old Magnavox computer that ran DOS, and we had a dot matrix printer and stuff. And I remember just like, this is the coolest thing. Then it was like, well, what the heck do I need to print? So I fiddled with it for a bit, and that was about it.
When I learned to code, jQuery ruled them all, and I learned to code in 2022. I'm saying jQuery is still Bay. So we are doing a thing called Tech the Halls, where for the last 2 weeks of the year, because we're off between Christmas and New Year's, we are making some minor improvements to the app at Podia. I finally got to go back to my removing Webpacker work that I started 2 months ago.
Hey.
And it only took a day to get everything, because I only had JavaScript left. It only took a day to move everything
Isn't that
over.
how it goes? You like put a project down because you're like, we'll never finish this. And then you come back to it 2 months later and it's a day's worth of work. And you're like, we could have just done that 2 months ago.
The problem is we still have a very small set of pages relying on our old assets. So like we have some JavaScript in the asset pipeline still.
jQuery.
So one of the problems I had was that one of our major pages left still used jQuery UJS. And so I couldn't just abandon it. But then when I tried to we'll use Rails UJS, you can't use them if they're both loaded. I had to rewrite that page before I left for my sabbatical so that when I came back, I could remove the jQuery UJS dependency. But I did that. I had a couple of interesting things I ran into. So we're using esbuild, and there's a Stimulus importing plugin for esbuild. So instead of having to manually import each controller, basically like what the Webpack helper did, where it can just traverse a folder and load all the controllers. And that was okay, except I had to figure out how to load multiple folders that live side by side, but not all of them. So I just used that plugin, import 3 times, and aliased the definitions. And then I was able to say .concat, and just concat them all together. And that worked. Okay. Stimulus works. And then we use React Rails. It's in the React repository on GitHub. React has a React Rails gem, and they have a React Rails UJS thing to actually load in the components, so that in the Rails side, you can be render React component and just give it the name of the component. And that also broke. This is where it got messy. I had to bring in a glob import plugin. I had to glob them, but then also loop through all the path names and remove the prefix in front of it, where it actually was, because the React Rails gem expects just the name of the component, not the folder structure leading up to it. And then I had to overwrite the constructor to understand how to do that. Most of this was on an issue, I think, maybe even in the gem. But once we got that pattern down, it was kind of just, we have a couple of what were packs, which are now entries for us. And so it was just copy and pasting that code and changing the function, what folder structure it was. But I mean, we did all that in a day. And there are a couple other little things. We magically imported icons on the fly in certain components. We couldn't do that anymore. I built an object where each key was the name that we were sending from the props, and the right-hand side of it was the actual file, where it is. Basically, any file we could possibly use, I kind of had to build a little mini dictionary for it instead of just importing on the fly. We had to explicitly import all of them. But I feel that was the 3 biggest things. And we have a lot of JavaScript. So the fact we were able to ship it so quickly, I was really happy with. 3 months, but 1 day, really, for most of it was pretty good. Hi, my name is Andrew Mason, and I'd like to tell you about Honeybadger. Whether US East 1 is down or you forget to add a configuration file, everyone has an outage from time to time. When your next outage occurs, transparency is critical. The difference between a minor annoyance that people soon forget and a fiasco that creates sustained resentment is how you communicate. That's why you need Honeybadger. Honeybadger is a crucial component of your incident response plan with their uptime monitoring service that now has an exciting new feature, public status pages. Create a new status page with custom domains, branding, and more. Don't let Twitter be the only way your users can find out if your app's down. Sign up for Honeybadger to improve your incident response with a shiny new status page that you'll be proud to show users. Visit honeybadger.io and start giving your users a better experience today. Let them know that Remote Ruby, and specifically Andrew Mason, sent you.
I did the same thing with the Stimulus imports and stuff, and then made the esbuild Rails node module. So if anybody wants to
cool.
just grab something and have that done, that's what we use in Jumpstart Pro and everything. It'll go in namespace stuff as well. So if you're importing Stimulus controllers folder with several folders below, it should handle all that properly for you. And then you just I forget. It's in the README. Like you just loop through and register your controllers and you're good to go. But yeah, that is a pain. You reminded me of, they pulled over the confirm modal to Turbo, but they don't have support for the disable with stuff anymore. I don't think that got moved over. And like you could use the stimulus controller for it, but it was very convenient just to have it automatically done for you. That's one thing that I wish would get figured out and handled. And that old stuff could just be changed ideally to data confirm and data disable with to data turbo confirm and data turbo disable with. But I know there's some discussion about like, do these really belong in turbo or not? And to me, turbo's already handling the link navigations and the form submissions, then yes, that was the whole purpose of the disable with and confirms anyways. So if the tool is going to be doing the navigation stuff, it seems like it makes sense to have that done. But I haven't looked for a while to see if any drop-in stimulus controller replacement or anything was done for that somebody had maybe shared or whatever. But I think that was like the one last thing I was like, really, I can get rid of them or ignore them for now or whatever. Like they aren't the worst thing in the world, but it's nice to have the button disable while the form is processing. And if you can make it really simple and easy, that's great.
I've had to write so much JavaScript to disable freaking buttons in the past month. So I completely even forgot that used to be a thing. And I'm like, oh, we just always lived in this hell where I write JavaScript to disable all these buttons over and over.
This is more generic use case because we're talking about like submitting specifically, but there is also some functionality we use at Podia now where we're actually looking at like form validity. And using CSS will disable buttons if a form's not valid. Like if a field's required and then there's no content in it, then the button's just disabled. And I know this is a different thing, but that's something I've really enjoyed it's just a nice little touch that I really like. And I'm in this kind of deep thought cycle of like, I think a lot about the front end right now. And I'm really mad at the front end. So anything...
You mad, bro?
I'm mad.
You big mad?
I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that all the cool stuff happening in front end is mostly happening in React and Vue and projects like that. And that...
While you were talking, I was just searching the issues about this, the form disable stuff. I forgot that Sean Doyle had made a PR that's actually really freaking cool. So you make a button with 2 spans inside of it, and Turbo will automatically add the disabled attribute to the button when it's submitted or whatever. So then you have just CSS swapping which is visible instead. So it will automatically take care of it for you. But there's, of course, now a button instead of an input element, which is, I believe, required in order to do this because an input isn't going to support HTML inside. Then you've got to have these 2 different spans that you put inside of your button, which you've got to then have some way of generating that. Maybe you build yourself a helper for it or whatever, but it's going to be a little bit more annoying than disable with and a little data attribute there. But it is possible. I did forget that. I don't know that it works on links or whatever, but I don't know that I ever really used it on links, mostly just form buttons. But sorry, I'm with you. The front end is 100% the hardest part right now of anything we build. And Turbo is getting a lot more complete finally, which is good. But, it just feels like the thing you always have to think about, how do we solve these problems instead of like, there's a pattern available that we just follow.
And Turbo's only a slice of the problem to me. It helps Turbo and things like HTMX that build these ways to do the kind of the reactivity part. But even still, one thing that was really cool about, I guess it's still really cool, but one thing that was really cool about Bootstrap is you didn't have to think. Once you learned the system, you just used it. And why are you shaking your head, Andrew?
I'm so triggered. That is not true.
No.
If you were in your Play app or your personal side project, sure. In a production application, I have worked with Bootstrap for the majority of my career, and I can tell you right now, it is not just slapping button tags everywhere once you get at that scale.
Why not?
Because it becomes this disaster where you have to try to override things because someone before you tried to override things and now you're overriding more things. And
so that doesn't sound like Bootstrap.
And you have to have your Bootstrap classes in a very specific way. And if they're not in that very specific way, then things are not going to work. So when you try to wrap certain things in turbo frames, all of a sudden your CSS doesn't work for dropdowns and things like that.
So that doesn't sound like a fault of Bootstrap. Like that sounds like a fault of someone trying to override Bootstrap.
No, I'm sorry. It's not Bootstrap's fault. It's when used, I often find that happening.
So I'm zooming out a little bit because yes, we use Bootstrap at Podia and it causes trouble even at Podia because Bootstrap itself doesn't have everything we need. Bootstrap's just an example though. Like if you work in that design system and you stay there, you get a lot of functionality for free.
Yes.
Tailwind UI is really awesome. Like it makes things look good. But in terms of interactivity, if you're not using React or Vue, which a lot of us who are using Tailwind UI in Rails are probably using it mostly on side projects, are not using React and Vue. I had a talk with Chris the other day. Like whenever I see requires.js and Tailwind UI, I'm like, oh, because I don't want to spend the time to build as complete of an interactive component as they've spent. You ever looked at headless UI? Like keyboard navigation works really well. It's accessibility friendly. So I don't know. I'm just frustrated writing front end code. And
Alpine components.
Alpine components help. They do.
That's what I was going to say. The nice part about Alpine is you're not creating a separate JavaScript file and trying to keep everything in sync. You're just one place and all of that's there together. But then another library you got to deal with too.
Yeah, I like Alpine. I freaking love talking to Caleb. Something's just missing for me still. I think it frustrates me like when I look at there's 50 different React UI libraries, have every component you could need and props to customize them. And then you don't think about it. You just build these interfaces with React, but it comes with a bunch of other trade-offs like build tooling. And when something doesn't go exactly how it should, you got to get into the depths. So maybe it's not a solvable problem, but it's frustrating me and my patience for it's getting thin.
Yeah, it's not easy.
What?
That would fix it.
TypeScript?
Yeah.
Prototype.js. Let's go back in time.
Okay. Backbone?
When things were easier.
The member berries. Remember when we just had jQuery?
Yes.
Remember when there was just the CDN?
Yes.
Remember.
I mean, building UIs wasn't great back then either.
Maybe that's the trick. We just have to be okay with shitty UIs.
Honestly,
Maybe.
I've been advocating for that for a long time. It's like whenever someone hands me a really complex UI interaction, I'm like, what if we just showed a JavaScript alert and called it a day?
Well, there's a part of me, it's my annoying like perfectionist side that I've just never been happy with the UI I've written.
I've never been happy with the UI you write either.
I have
no one has.
always been angry at the UI, actually.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I get a deep satisfaction from writing Ruby and Rails, and I don't know, it scratches an itch, and I feel a lot more proud of what I write there. Maybe I'm just a shitty UI developer. Maybe that
you
is
might
the
just
problem.
need to consult a doctor
Maybe.
if you've had this itch for more than 4 hours.
It sounds like you're just a back-end engineer who like wants to be better at front-end development, but can't spend ultimately the amount of time that is required to like intimately be in that space. So you just have to jump in when you need to. And because of that, you only have this certain level of knowledge, and it's frustrating because then you go back to where you're happy and used to and comfortable, and you're like, wow, things are always better here.
Yeah, but why can't we have both?
You know, Caleb's probably one of the people who are the most efficient at building the UI components and stuff, like on the front end. And the amount of like nuance to all of it, getting that right, like to use these things, you don't even realize all of those details that were done to make it work smoothly with the animations, getting timed right, and keyboard and everything else that goes to it. So when you like use it, you're like, oh, this feels great. And you don't realize that was a week's worth of work to build this one little widget. And on the back end, we're like so efficient in building a lot of complex things. It really feels like you get slowed down in the front end because it is much more tedious work. And I don't know that there's necessarily a way to solve that. That's React and Alpine and Vue and all these different tools are trying to solve that, but they haven't really made it as efficient as like our backend stuff.
I think React has done a good job, or people in the React community have done a good job. I just think it comes with a cost I'm not willing to pay of supporting that type of build tooling and that type of trade-off. Maybe that's it. Maybe I just need to use Alpine.
Maybe you give it a shot and see what happens. Maybe that just needs to be a week or two of, hey, let's go build this stuff and see if you actually feel any better. Maybe you won't.
Well, I'm just going to write Ruby. And speaking of Ruby, we started to, as part of Tech the Halls, also rename some models that have changed their domain naming in the last couple of years. So when we used to allow you to send newsletters, which we have renamed within the company as broadcast, we allow you to send campaigns, which are emails that drip out. So therefore, they used to be called a drip sequence in our app. And they have associations and also belong to other things. And we're finally like, oh, we should rename them. And yikes. We also have things like, we used to call our memberships. Now they're communities. So someone else is working on that part. So Andrea and I thought, oh, we'll just like pick up renaming, what was it, like drip email to campaign email. And then that was like 60 or 80 files changed, something like that. But one of the things we ran into is actually something my coworker Harry messaged me about earlier that day. So we're leaving the tables in the database the same name right now. That has nothing to do with it, but it is context. It might be worth it. So like the campaign email is still called drip emails in the table. We just say self.table name in the model. And so if you have a campaign has many campaign emails and you're not updating the name of the association. So a campaign still has many drip emails, but you've renamed it to be campaign email. If you don't set inverse of on that association, it'll know how to build one. So if I said like campaign.dripemails.build, it would build it, but it would lose the association
because it's even infer it from the model name instead of the table name.
There's no foreign key yet. Like it can't go look in the database. So it just creates like an in-memory reference. And so like tests started failing because that was nil. It was such a subtle thing. And we encountered that because Active Record will automatically infer the inverse of, like that's just the thing that happens behind the scenes. So yeah, we had to set that and that fixed it. But that was a thing I've always heard about inverse of, but I've never actually had to use inverse of until this week. It was fascinating.
Yeah. And if you use the inverse of, that uses the association name to generate the like drip campaign ID or whatever, the parent model.
And you can override the foreign key, which is what we were doing. And so it worked. Yeah. It worked with actual like records stored in the database. It was able to find those. But when it actually came to...
Right, because that only affects the actual query portion of it, not the assigning new attributes and association stuff. Yeah, you don't think about that because it's so automatic 99% of the time. But when you're doing these things and you want to preserve the database columns as is, because that could be a maintenance task, a burden to run maybe at night or something that you have to do that, or you have to run 2 columns or something and transfer stuff over right to the new one. And it ends up getting like a lot more work than you expect, but the regular Rails path is like, sick. This is so easy. Like, voila, we're done. And then you went off the rails, bro.
I did. Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's in the docs. You can just go find it. They have a really good example. I didn't even think of that. So the way I Harry and I traced it down, I was like, oh, we'll just bundle open Rails and pry in all these like points in Active Record to find out where it was. And once
which option that's using,
yeah. And then when it's like, okay, like this reflection type is nil, but if we set it back to what it was before, like we read checkout main, there's actually like a reflection type here that is the association it should belong to. And it's like, okay, now we know why. And so if you've never bundled open and just pried in, it's my secret sauce. It's maybe a trash way, but it works.
Oh, it works great. And it teaches you about how Rails works internally, I think, which is going to give you the most tools in your tool bag for the future. Like you'll fix this problem, but 3 years from now when you end up renaming something else and you're like, oh, what the hell did we do last time? You'll remember we need to go look at these parts of Rails because that's where it was. And you may not know exactly what the option was you had to specify or whatever, but you know how to find it. That's the real trick that you learn there. Am I the only one who reads those options for the associations? And there's like as and inverse of and several other things. I always read the docs and I'm like, what the hell does this mean? It's never super clear. Like, do I use this one or that one? And then am I doing it right? I always like when I end up doing something complex like this, I like have to try a few things and then run it in the Rails console, just confirm it works. Because for some reason, the naming of some of those options and the descriptions of them is just not crystal clear to me when I read it.
It's confusing. Some of those things, if you know a lot about databases and associations and things, like maybe you do just understand. But a lot of times I feel like I don't understand those types of things until I encounter them. And even then, I still don't necessarily understand it. But once you encounter it more than once, then it starts to click. So I maybe still don't even fully understand inverse of. Maybe I need to encounter it more.
You'll end up starting to maintain active record for us, and then you'll finally understand it.
Yeah, that'll be it. And then I'll go write jQuery. That'll be my escape hatch.
On the back end?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Where's jQuery for Node? That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
So
server-side
right
jQuery.
In query.
Better get that
no
repo
query
name.
That's all I've got.
I think that bundle opening a gem should be the encouraged way to debug. Honestly, it's not as easy the more junior you are, but like Chris said, it gets you more exposure to like what's happening underneath. And I think like just reading something, you find a blog post and you're like, oh, copy paste, like this works now. Perfect. And you don't actually learn. You learned what the issue is. The issue is that the key for this was not correct. And so now you intimately know more about Active Record and intimately know more about Rails. And like Chris said, you know where to go find that. Yeah, I would highly recommend if you're not using Bundle Open, definitely maybe try it the next time you encounter an issue and see what Rails is doing under the hood or see what that gem is doing under the hood. And I don't know, it can also help you maybe solve the problem a lot quicker if you can accurately identify what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you really are forced into. This is what the heck is actually happening versus you read the docs and you're like, maybe this applies, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Hopefully I'll find something that's actually as accurate to what's going on. And I just wanted to mention too, like when you were talking about how it's hard for juniors, what's nice is if you can step through the code line by line though. So if you put in your binding IRB, the second you call some library line or your association or something, if you can step through that and then look at all the instance variables and local variables that are actually inside of Rails or whatever library it is, you can then run them line by line and you see like, oh, it took this association, it looked for this relation name out of that. Then it converted that from a symbol to a string. Then it looked in the attributes for it or whatever. You start to like piece it all together. And if you're just copying what Rails was going to run or the library is going to run line by line yourself, then you get to inspect every step and see this is what it's doing. And it goes down this branch and we can ignore all this code because it hit this if statement and we're not going to have to deal with the else or whatever. And you like start to piece together the exact little steps along the way instead of going from like here straight to the error And that's a big leap because that could have made 100 function calls or something in between then. If you are a junior trying to do this, copy paste every line of code, then follow it along in the actual source, and you'll like have a much better understanding of it, and it won't be that scary. My cat's having a little soccer game over here.
Say, there's a World Cup going on behind you. What are you doing?
He loves his ping pong balls.
Same.
Yeah.
All right. See you next week.
All right.